Welcome into the Illini Inquirer Podcast. It is Jeremy Werner and Joey Wagner, and in the middle of this March Madness, we're going to talk some football. Spring football, because Illinois is underway. They're on spring break this week, so it's kind of a good time to do it. They got 2 practices in with just the helmet shoulder pads. They call it the spiders this past week, and then they'll really dive in with the pads when they get back after spring break next week. And there's a lot to talk about. Some things we've talked about a little bit on this podcast, but now being able to talk to some of the coaches, the coordinators, hearing some things about how workouts are going. This will be a lot of fun, Joey, to break down spring football that feels pretty, what's the word I want to use? It just feels pretty stable around here, right? With 16 starters returning, a good transfer class, and then you got this depth kind of developing. It just feels like a comfortable spring for Illinois football.
Yeah, not a lot of like who's going to win this starting position battle or that one. I think most of our interest lies in the depth. Brett Bielema has laid out more or less, I don't know, the expectation or the idea that you don't need to see Gabe Backus in March. You don't need to see Luke Altmaier in March. Some of those more established guys, why don't you just get some reps, some indie stuff, and then let some of those younger guys get big reps. And I think that makes sense given who comes back and what we're really watching from a depth standpoint, Jeremy. So it's interesting. I'm going to let you go on for one more thing, because I do have a question about starting before spring break.
Yeah.
Then going a break. And I don't know if right now is the time to pose my hypothesis, or you want to tease into this a little further.
Yeah, let me get into that. We'll talk about the no spring game. There's a long list of injuries as well, but we will just trade back and forth the main storylines we're interested in. And yeah, it's going to be a little bit more nitty gritty. Okay, this is not going to be a lot of starting position battles. So there's one group that we certainly will get into that. Before we dive too far in, yesterday's podcast had Michael Tulip. It was phenomenal. Go back and listen to it. But if you do, or you've heard it already, I just want to dive into this, give a correction clarification. LaTulip had a stat on upsets late in this podcast, and while his data was right, he didn't give the qualifier that upsets were defined by the NCAA by a team beating a team seated 5 spots higher. So if you're listening and you're like, only one upset in the Sweet 16 when he said that, I thought of that too, and I should have maybe questioned it, but it's LaTulip, and he's really good at this. But I just wanted to clarify and correct that. I don't think, Mike's human, and he's got the look, Joey, right now of a media member that's going through March. It's an exciting time, but it's a really big grind, but we love it. But I just don't want people to be putting money on their brackets with incomplete or misleading information. So there, I just wanted to get that out. And we appreciate Mike sharing that with us as well. But go, Joey. You wanted to talk about getting a weekend before spring break.
Yeah, Brett Bielema typically doesn't do this, right? It usually starts after spring break, and I thought, why are you doing what's really, I think, 2 or 3 practices, maybe? Probably 2.
I think 2.
And then a break, and then going out of it. And I kept thinking about that. And then I remember being at Pro Day or being at like the open practice, and there's high school kids everywhere. And I'm like, don't you kids go to school? Like, what is going on here? And I realized they were probably on spring break. And I haven't gotten this cleared up from Brett Bielema or anyone in the building, but my read is, hey, a lot of schools are probably on spring break right now. Let's have a couple practices and get some recruits in here. And, oh, hey, by the way, here's a pro day, and this could be you, Caden Cobbs, who's at the pro day or whatever the case. So that's probably as close as I can get to a theory. But if someone's listening to this, like, why did they do 2? And then all these coaches are in Florida or skiing somewhere or doing whatever. That's my theory as to why, and it makes sense to me.
No, it makes a lot of sense because they got a bus of kids from St. Louis up there, a bus of kids, was it Tennessee? I think Memphis or Nashville, somewhere like that. Like they got another bus of kids up there from there, and they got some of their top targets, Owen Fors, Jacob Eberhardt, some other guys, King Liggins. I just did an update on him. So, we'll dive into that because recruiting is one of my storylines to tease it moving forward because that's a big part of spring right now. But not part of spring is a spring game. First time I can remember, Joey, not having a spring game. I know sometimes spring game in quotation marks, like it's really just kind of a scrimmage and doing some situational stuff, but they're not going to have that in front of fans, a big day to do that. Part of it is injuries, which I buy that excuse. Part of it, Brett Bielema said, is due to ongoing construction at Memorial Stadium. I think they could get around that if they wanted to, but also there's the side of this of a lot of schools are ditching the spring game because they don't want other schools to see their players. And for an Illini team that has a lot of depth brewing here, I can understand that being a part of it. I do hate it for fans. Like maybe they'll have an open spring practice. Brett Bielema suggested he would. I hope he does because people are so excited about this team that I'd love to have an event. It doesn't have to be a game, but have the 2s and 3s practicing against each other. It doesn't have to be televised. And then just have like your spring sale in Memorial Stadium and just have an event where they can come and meet the players and get excited about a program that they are really excited about right now.
Yeah, the injuries are the things that I'll buy the most because Brett Bielema said you go down the list, no Caden Fagan, no, TJ McMillan, which is, I'm going down in the order of which he said that, but that's a death. Miles Scott, Xavier Scott, Jeremiah Warren. These are guys who are going to play big roles, and all of a sudden you're in your 2s, your 3s, your 4s, your Devo guys. I get that, right? I understand that. And to your point, and the point of a lot of coaches, you probably don't want some other school seeing, wait a minute, we can back channel and say, you're a backup there, but we would like it if you were to come here and start, and we've got money. That's part of this landscape of college football right now. So I understand that. I do hope that spring games don't go this way, where it's, I guess, shouldn't say that. I don't care if it's on TV or not, right? Like I get there are some people who can't come down. If coaches are worried about it being on TV, then there's ways around that. But I do hope there's an open practice where fans can come in and see, and whether that's maybe Luke Altmaier doesn't throw a single pass that day, but you're smiling and you're taking pictures and you're doing that whole deal with the fans. I do think as this thing continues to grow and more buzz comes around, that you want to have that kind of relationship, I guess, where people can see you, can know what to expect. I will say, like, I saw a report today that Deion Sanders said he would like to play against another team, and Fran Brown at Syracuse said, hey, let's go. We'll come to college. I would like that. I think there are a number of questions that come with that, but I think that would be a lot of fun for kind of those practices leading into that, and then a spring scrimmage and however that looks.
Even if it's a Illinois State or an Eastern Illinois or an
Absolutely.
SI, something like that, I think would be a lot of fun. Or Northern. If you don't want to play Northern because there's really no benefit of doing that, like have them come down and you can scrimmage and listen, you don't have to play your starters. But, that's a very valuable experience, I think, for both teams, and you can sell tickets. You can make money off it, right? Most likely.
Yeah, but then again, you wonder if you're Northern, like you worry about this guy getting poached in 2 years. There's all sorts of when everyone.
Illinois got to see him up close. That offensive lineman looks like he belongs, right?
I mean, it's one of those that everyone is so worried about someone or someone's getting poached from their roster that you want to just close it up as much as you can. And the downside of that is obviously the fans who want to see their team early on. In spring football, it doesn't matter really. Like those spring games don't matter, but it's a chance to see those guys do football things and kind of a long break between games.
And at the end of the day, Illinois fans just want Brett Bielema to win football games, and if this helps him win football games, they'll be fine with it, right?
And they'll be and I think even more if you can just come into Memorial Stadium for a day and smile and watch a couple passes get thrown around on a nice spring day. I don't know that the whole pomp and circumstance of a spring game is going to really tick off a lot of fans. I mean, there are fans who want to come in and see it, but I think if there's a way to still have some access one day without the whole name and whatnot, that would work.
All right. The other part is injuries here. Let's go down the list really quick. Caden Fagan had that hip surgery last fall. Won't be here in the spring, but he's on pace to join the team in the fall. TJ Griffin, who was at linebacker last year and now is back at DB, had postseason shoulder surgery. A lot of shoulders here. Freshman offensive
lineman.
I
think TJ Griffin might still be with the linebackers. Okay. He's listed as a DB, but that's neither here nor there.
Okay. Freshman offensive lineman J.J. Hurtis had a knee surgery after his senior year of high school, so he's out. Ashton Hollins, both shoulders during the last 6 months. Andre Lovett had a shoulder injury coming in. TJ McMillan, shoulder, he's out. That's a significant one because that's your backup center. Mario Sanders had a lower leg injury late in the year. Cole Rusk still has his ACL. They might get back at some point this spring. Offensive lineman Desmond Schuster, who I thought could be on the 2 deep, Joey, shoulder. Miles Scott had a shoulder as well. He suffered that in the bowl game. Xavier Scott just healing up some things from the season and won't be with us. This feels like
he's got the first round draft pick or the high round draft pick injury that doesn't need to be out there.
Veteran maintenance. That's what that sounds like. Grant Smith had a shoulder as he comes in as a freshman. Tyler Strain, shoulder. He's out for the spring. Freshman offensive lineman Eddie Turk. This one's a bummer because moving to offensive line would have been fun to see how he does. And I know Bart Miller, just talking with him the other week, he's pretty high on him. So he had a foot injury that required surgery. That happened during winter workouts. So that's a bummer. And then Jeremiah Warren, now single digit, number 8 Jeremiah Warren, defensive lineman, which suggests pretty important player. He had postseason shoulder injury as well. So that's a long list and a lot of shoulders, Joey.
Yeah, it is. And I probably should dive into that with Brett Bielema a little bit more. And he said after that, he said, this kind of the year of the shoulder, this growing trend throughout football, shoulder and feet are the two big things. If you want to, there's a lot of names we just named off, right? So you look in, I'm not worried about Xavier Scott, Miles Scott, Caden Fagan missing spring practices. I'd be more concerned about being out there, right? But you look at someone like J.J. Hurtis, who would have had a chance to come in and get some just real-life reps. Ashton Holland, I'm still fascinated by him. I think you need to get him on the football field more.
For him, that's a bummer because they got talent. We'll dive into wide receiver, but this is missing a fall and then missing spring with a wide receivers coach who just came in here last spring. I think that's significant for a guy who's fighting for a job or a role on this roster. So I think that's significant. I think the biggest ones here are McMillan, Turk, and Warren, because those are kind of rising players who could be guys in your 2 deep. I think Jeremiah Warren has a chance to start at nose tackle. So those would be my 3 biggest ones. And then Cole Rusk, you just like to get him back on the field, but I think we understood when you suffer a knee injury or ACL injury in August, you're probably not going to be back fully for spring ball.
Yeah, Mario Sanders falls into the Ashton Hollands territory where you want to see him get on the field. McMillan, I'm not as worried about. He's taken a ton of 2 reps. Like, he is a center. I don't think there's a lot of position flex they're interested in. He's taken plenty of center reps. Like, I don't –
Got plenty last training camp, right, with Kreutz?
That's right. I don't worry a ton about him missing spring reps because he's had a number of those. But you look at the younger guys, the freshmen, the early enrollees who you would have liked to have seen get out there, run around a little bit. And then, Des Schuster's a guy, Eddie Turk's a guy, Jeremiah Warren. Those are guys who are either interesting in the sense of, as you mentioned with Warren, could possibly get some really meaningful snaps, or Eddie Turk is just get him some offensive reps, right? I'm really interested in him because he was such a good recruiting win for Illinois out of high school, and the guy that, I think back to Ryan Easterling's film breakdown of him on the offensive line and moving at guard, and he's so fascinating. Probably could have maybe even had some center opportunity without McMillan this spring. So, the younger guys are the ones you really focus on where it's a bummer to not see them out there.
All right, let's dive into our storylines. We'll just go back and forth. I got a list of like 10, so we can dive into these for a couple minutes each. It's all right. I got you. But number one, let's start with it because there's not a lot of starting competitions. I mean, we could talk about competition for rotation spots a lot, but the one spot where I think there's an intense competition is wide receiver. The only position, Joey, where you're replacing starters is wide receiver with Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin on the way out. I feel very comfortable that Hudson Clement and Colin Dixon are going to be 2 of the top 3 wide receivers on this team when it comes to reps. They are very high on what Hudson Clement brings to this. Brett Bielema has mentioned that he thinks he can be an NFL player. Colin Dixon, Hank Beatty ended the season great, right? The lasting memory of there. He had 13 snaps in that South Carolina game and still had 94 yards. It's because Colin Dixon gives you so much versatility as that power slot, and I think his ability to make plays after the catch can go to another level this year because he's like a running back once he gets in the open field. So I feel confident those 2 guys are going to play a lot. Hank Beatty's going to play more this year as just a sure-handed kind of security blanket for Luke Altmaier. But after that, it gets really interesting, right? Is this the year for Malik Elzy? Can Justin Bowick beat him out? He was brought in here to force competition there. And then Alex Kapka-Jones is a kid that they have a lot of faith in. Moved to a single-digit number himself, Alex Kapka-Jones. I know Luke Altmaier thinks highly of him, right? And then you got a freshman, Joey. I'll hand it over to you that that they're pretty high on that can maybe crack this rotation. So that's going to be the last thing I'll say before I hand it off to you. This is going to be a competition that is intense, and it'll be very interesting to see how this goes out. But like, I'm still confident in this position because of the talent that they have, the experience that they have, and what they did in the portal.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think the starting jobs are the intense competition. I think we have a pretty good understanding of who will be in that rotation. We probably know the top 6. You just laid them out, right? Maybe someone rises up. Maybe one person drops off of that. But I think that top 6, this is going to be more of a rotation-driven position group than it was a year ago with Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin getting so many snaps. Colin Dixon could move outside in some packages to keep him and Hank Beatty on the field. So there's a lot more mixing and matching I think you can do. I do agree that Hudson Clement, Colin Dixon, those are 2 of my starters in my brain going into the season.
Which can I do this just to explain it? Zachary Franklin was the Z wide receiver. It's kind of a guy who goes in motion, off the line of scrimmage, can play a little slot, right? I mean, I know Pat Bryant did too. So this is all, as you said, you can rotate these guys, but they see Hudson Clement kind of in that Z role. Hank Beatty, Colin Dixon are slots. And then you got that X, that big physical receiver, and Pat Bryant. That's the competition, right? Like that's going to be the fun one to watch.
Yeah, table set for Malik Elzy. We've been talking about Malik Elzy for 2 or 3 years, waiting for him to really have this opportunity. Some of that, he was blocked out a little bit by Pat Bryant, by Zachary Franklin. This is a really big spring for him to just grab hold of that and say, this is mine. Congratulations on bringing other guys in. I'm taking this, and I'll take a majority of the reps. Thank you. But you'll see what Justin Bower can do. Alex Kapka-Jones, Alexander, I think he prefers to be called. Yeah. We kind of overlook him, right? Like, it's just constantly that last guy we mentioned, and they talk about him a lot, like a ton. So just put that on your radar, that he's a guy that maybe he's not front of mind with your shiny new toy and Justin Bowick or the guy that you've been excited about for years, Malik Elzy. Kapka-Jones just keeps kind of resurfacing his name. So put that away, keep that in your idea chamber to see what that looks like. But those are the guys, right? Like, I think those are the primary group that we think about in terms of most significant impacts at wide receiver. You teased it a minute ago. I'm fascinated by Braden Trimble. I'm absolutely it's hard to do this in March, right? Because you don't want to go nuts with what you've heard for the last 6 weeks. It's been really positive. Brett Bielema on this podcast was really, really complimentary of Braden Trimble. If you talk around, there's more buzz about him. I think there's going to be opportunity for him to get snaps. I think he could be a returner on kick return. I think there's possibilities out there for him, but he's made an impact coming in here as a true freshman. There's just a lot of guys in front of him. We kind of ran into this, to be honest, which is where a lot of my hesitation in terms of expectations come from. One, it's so early, and two, there's a lot of buzz about Malik Elzy as a freshman. A lot. And we had kind of, I think I said on here, hey, he'll probably dethrone Casey Washington by the end of the year. Well, that didn't work, and Casey Washington was a 6th-round pick. So
to be honest with you, halfway through the year, I thought, hey, he deserves more reps because Casey was fine, but it was like, hey, they need more impact. Then Casey ended this year great and was awesome in the pre-draft process.
So what we want to do is tell you what we're hearing, and we're hearing really good things about Braden Trimble and his explosiveness out of routes and his speed and everything. It's from a lot of people, or you just kind of a name. You put out a feeler, some are just unsolicited. Hey, this kid, well, you're hearing a little bit more of that. So it's our job to tell you that we're hearing that, but also it's March 18th. They've had 2 spring ball practices. Let's pump the brakes and see what this looks like. But he's a guy who could be that freshman who finds his way into playing.
It's a great way of approaching it, Joey, because there is big buzz about what Braden Trimble showed in winter workouts. You've heard it from Brett Bielema on the record. We've heard it from Barry Lunny on the record. We've heard it from Luke Altmaier on the record saying this kid has more confidence than I had as a freshman coming in. He knows he belongs here. But, talking around, you ask about the group and people look at it and go, Braden Trimble, man. And that's worth telling people because they got a really good one. They got a really talented player here, whether it's this year or next year. They got an older group of receivers right now. So even if Braden Trimble's not a big impact this year in 2026, he could be a huge impact for whoever is throwing the ball to him. But I asked somebody who works with him, like, what is it about him? And they say his ability to get out of breaks is as quick as they've seen. And he's got ridiculous speed, which I don't know if we talked enough about as a recruit. We talked about his
probably didn't.
Smoothness. He's a really good athlete, able to go up in high point. A little thin's got to add strength, which is always a concern. We're talking about his position, but his competitiveness too. Like, he's got great length at 6'2", but that quickness and speed is what is really shining for them right now. And they say looks a little different than what they've had. So, you think about the Illinois receivers here recently. Franklin's a 4'6" guy. Bryant's a 4'6" guy. Isaiah Williams was a 4'6" guy. Casey Washington was the 4'5" guy, right? So that's the next step, I think, for this offense, is adding those burners, and they think Braden Trimble can be one of those, big play guys.
Yeah, I would say I wouldn't call it cautious optimism, because I think the optimism's real. I'd say set your expectations cautiously. And I don't...
Especially as a freshman in a group that's got Hudson Clement, Colin Dixon, Hank Beatty, Malik Ellisy, Justin Bowick. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I think his ability as a return man, I think what we've heard here gives him an opportunity. The more things you can do as a young player on the field, Brett Bielema has shown he's not married to the idea of redshirting every single freshman that walks through this. So maybe you want to start thinking if he's a guy who could play 4 or 5 games. It does, again, feel a little early, but the buzz is there. The buzz is there on him, and let's see how he's going to probably run. This is what freshmen do. They come in early. He might run into a wall this summer, right? He might run into a wall the second week of training camp, and you got to fight through those things, and that's part of it. But early on, the returns have been really encouraging for them.
But this is it for like, this is the time for Malik Ellisy, right? And you got Absolutely. A guy in Justin Bowick who's 6'4", really impressive, man, physically. And he had 2 great games at Ball State. That's a small sample size. But Malik's been in this system. He's a big physical blocker, which they need. He's going to play, but he's got to be more consistent as a receiver, right, with his hands. And he's got to earn the trust of a Luke Altmaier. So, again, he's got guys at that X position with Alex Kapka-Jones who got reps over Malik late in the season. A guy like Justin Bowick. So there's been positive stuff about Malik Ellisy, but they brought in competition for a reason. So it's a big time for him. But I like that Illinois brought in people to make him better, right? Like, that's what Brett Bielema said. Is like, we brought in people to force competition. You have to play well to earn this job. We're not handing it to you. And that's for everybody, not specifically Ellisy.
Right. And for Ellisy, it's 3rd year in the system, 3rd year with this quarterback. That helps. I think that continuity, that familiarity will certainly help. But this is his big spring. I think we could probably say the same in the summer, big fall for him. This is a spring to, while some of those other guys are on a learning curve, to be ahead of that. And they kind of stand out here early. And we talked about Kapka-Jones. It's a fascinating group. It's so different, interesting differently than it was a year ago. It's like, who replaces Isaiah Williams? Is it Hank Beatty? Is it Colin Dixon? We talked about Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin. I feel like I pretty much have an understanding of how the slot is going to look going into this year. Now it's the other way. And what are those outside receivers going to look like? Jeremy, are we done? You good on receivers?
Yeah, I want to say, like, we've talked about Hudson Clement, but I just think the floor is so high on him. But I want to hit on your point. I don't think there's going to be there's not going to be a 700 snap guy here, right? Like, even maybe 600. I do think it's going to be more, this guy plays 60% of snaps. This guy plays 50. This guy plays 30, right? I think there's going to be a little bit more of a rotation there. So, yeah, go ahead. Storyline number 2.
Yeah, you wrote about it today, and I think it's a huge storyline, is the offensive line, but the depth. We know the 5 starters, or the 5 returning starters, with center Josh Kreutz, left guard Josh Geske. Big deal to have left tackle J.C. Davis back, right guard Brandon Henderson, right tackle Melvin Priestley. Another big deal to have him back. It sounds like he probably could have explored the NFL thing maybe a little more seriously than he did this past offseason. We know that. There's known commodities at those positions, but you've got to replace depth. Zy Chrysler's at Colorado. Kevin Wigginton is at Virginia. Hunter Whiteneck is at Western Michigan. Those aren't guys who played a ton of snaps. Chrysler played the most of those last season, but those are guys who are valuable depth. An offensive line, there's going to be a turned ankle somewhere. There's going to be some sort of something, whether it's in training camp or in the course of a season. We saw it with Josh Kreutz. I think it was his knee last training camp. So who steps in to those roles? We talked about TJ McMillan he's the backup center when he's healthy, period. End of story, right? He's the guy who's going to be, I would imagine, the starter after Josh Kreutz is gone. But what about your guards? What about your tackles? Is it Kellen Francis at tackle? I think a guy we need to talk about, we'll start here, is Brandon Hansen. He's tackle, guard, either one of those two. He's a guy who is sneaky, like 5.5, 6, right, on the depth chart in terms of what they think they can see out of him. He traveled last year with the team. He's massive. I mean, he's absolutely massive. He's really, really strong. The first commit of that recruiting class. Sounds like his development arc has been pretty significant, and he's impressed them to the point that I think he might push for a starting job somewhere. I don't know that he would win it, and I don't think I would qualify as it, being that close, but he's their 6th offensive lineman, similar to the way we talked about Brandon Henderson a year ago. I don't know that Hansen would back up as many spots on the offensive line, notably probably left tackle, but he's a guy who is going to be a backup at probably 2 spots, both on the right side, maybe even that left guard spot. But he's a name to know going into spring ball.
Brett Bielema said he's the guy he's most excited to see this spring. And I think that's significant because, while Zy Chrysler I thought was just more serviceable, I think he was a 2-time All-Big Ten honorable mention guy. I thought he was a serviceable starter. In the Big Ten, there were good flashes, and then there were negatives. But him getting an extra year of eligibility, I think, is awesome for him. One, financially, but two, like he's a good get for Colorado. He's a proven Big Ten of offensive lineman. But losing him, he was rotating with Brandon Henderson even late in the season, and he had some good reps for them late in the season. So that's not a nothing. And Henderson got on the field, looked like he belonged, had his ups and downs, as you would expect from a first-year starter and a true sophomore. But he's still got to prove it, that he can be a good quality starter. But that's kind of where Hansen is now. Right? I agree with that comp. Like, they're a little bit different players. Like, Henderson's more athletic. Obviously, he's been here a little bit longer, but Hansen's powerful. This recruitment, Illinois got him early, and there weren't a lot of other offers. But towards the end of it, some Big Ten schools, some SEC schools started really trying to get Brandon Hansen, and he stuck with Illinois. So he's massive. He's powerful. I do think he's more of a guard, just foot speed-wise. I thought he was kind of like Whitenack as a junior in high school, but he's improved as an athlete, and I think they think higher of him, a little bit better of an athlete. So, yeah, I think he's their 6th guy on the offensive line, at least at guard, and potentially a guy who could play right tackle. So he's significant. And as important as anything, Joey, it's important to know that he could be a starter next year, right? Because you're losing 4 starters next year. Henderson has the versatility to play multiple spots, including tackle. So I'm interested to see his development as a second-year starter. But they need to find starters for 2026 and beyond, and Hansen's a huge part of that.
Yeah, I think real quick on Henderson, I think an emphasis this spring is just keeping him at probably guard, letting him just be the best guard he can be. He was literally everywhere last year. You've been a little tight end, you center, your tackles. Let him focus on being a guard and cutting it loose a little bit there, I think, is something they're interested to see out of him. But then you start looking around a little bit, Jeremy, and it's some more younger guys in that conversation. Zafir Stewart, he looks it, man.
He's looked it since he showed up. Yeah.
Person.
No, that's the one thing Brett Bielema said. I asked him, where is your depth? The 4 years of roster building, where is it showing up most? And he said, I just look at the offensive line. Because I remember first year he was here, Doug Kramer's at center. I know the Kramer family doesn't like it, but he's a little bit undersized. But then he had guards that were smaller than him, right? He had 2 guards. Badovanak and who's Jarasati were the 2 guards next to him. And that's a small offensive line. Now you got Josh Geske, who's 6'6", 320 as your left guard. Brandon Henderson, 6'5", 320 something. And then your tackles are actually smaller than your guards right now with Priestley and Davis. But Zafir Stewart's another one of those guys. Good pedigree, comes from a really good program, Emotep in Philadelphia. But yeah, redshirt freshman that Bart Miller said could be a second-string tackle here. I think he was repping at right tackle, Bart said. But they also added some veteran depth at tackle, swing tackle, and Aiden Knappich out of Idaho. The plan is to redshirt him if they can, right? If they stay healthy, especially at left tackle. But he's 6'6", 295, needs to add strength, but an experienced guy. He's played both left tackle, right tackle, all big guys. So he's going up a level, Joey. But he is probably, the swing tackle. If an injury happened, tomorrow, I think Knappich would go in at left tackle, and we'll see about right tackle.
Yeah, I believe that in theory, but I think if you
Henderson
really
could go
want
to
to
left tackle.
redshirt him, you can move Henderson, and some of that probably depends on Brandon Hansen's, the comfort of which you feel putting him out there. But he is that guy that I don't know if it's too like steep to be like in case of emergency break the glass on him, but because I don't know the level of emergency. Right?
You're right. He'd be 7th or 8th in line, especially if Hansen is who they think he is, because you can move Henderson to one of those tackle spots.
Yeah, but it's clear they want to redshirt him. It's clear he's on board with being redshirted and possibly that left tackle next season. Then we get into it. I mentioned Kellen Francis earlier, a guy JUCO edition. He was injured early, traveled late. When they travel late, when guys are on the travel roster late after injuries have taken shape, you just want to take note of that, right? Because it means that there's someone that if kind of that emergency situation, they're going into a game. You don't travel just because they think you're a nice guy to have around the hotel. They want you to be able to contribute in a game. Zach Amland is a guy. Injuries have been a story for him early on in his career. I know they're high on him and what he's able to do. But you got to keep him on the field, right? And I think it's
a big spring significant. For him.
Yeah,
Bart was saying. Yeah, Bart was saying it's a big spring for him. He's got a tackle body. Bart said he's better guard. So that you got to find your way to a 2-deep spot at some point because Illinois' got 19 offensive linemen. But yeah, it's a big spring for him and Kellen Francis, I think, because they keep adding more offensive linemen, right? And if you're not working your way to a 2-deep as an upperclassman, then are you going to be here long term? That's the big thing. So I think you got to fight for roster spots now. In this new reality of 105 roster spots, you got to fight for them. So I think it's a big spring for those guys to show their progress.
Yeah, and then as we get down into this, Michael McDonough, I expect him to be the backup center with some guard versatility. This is where you wish J.J. Hurtis was able to go through spring ball because opportunity will clearly be there. I don't think Brett Bielema, Bart Miller, those guys are looking to get a ton of reps for their starters, right? You want to still build that continuity. You want to still make sure they're being productive and getting something out of spring ball, but this is a chance to really, really get in and look at that depth. So you wish JJ was able to go through that a little bit, but it's a big spring for those guys to solidify their spots in the 2-deep. And then I think the thing that's worth monitoring, Jeremy, out of spring, similar to last year, do they sniff around in the portal? Is there something they feel like they want to address, maybe a more experienced guard or tackle or someone in the spring window? I don't know if that's the case. I think we'll see how that shapes out. There's roster crunches, right? And I think that would be probably the biggest hurdle in place for that. But
hard to get a guy as a backup too. Like how many
100%.
How many Aiden Knappich are going to sign up for it? Griffin Rousseau also early enrollee, but yeah, I would have liked to have seen Turk this spring because I do think there was a path for him to make the 2-deep as the 9th or 10th guy potentially with this offensive line. All right, let's get to another storyline here. I'm going to go with Trey Petty. We know what Luke Altmaier is. We know he can take another step forward. Ethan Hampton is the most likely backup here. That's why you brought him in, to have a guy who's, seen the bullets fly past him, including at Notre Dame and leading his team to a win there at Northern Illinois. But this is a significant spring for Trey Petty because he's going to get a lot of reps in the Illinois offense. He got some of those last spring. Didn't get a lot of them last fall because he was a scout team quarterback. So he's repping in another team's offense. Now he's getting mental reps, right? He's getting the teaching in the classroom, but on the field, he was basically being Lenora Sellers and all these other quarterbacks. Jaden Daniels, or not Jaden Daniels. Who's the Kansas quarterback? Off the top of my head, Jalen Daniels. Yes, I know I was close, but he's repping those guys in practice. So now, as the number 3 quarterback, potentially number 2 quarterback, he's going to get a lot of reps. And it's an important time for him because now he can get a head start on Carson Boyd, who's also an early enrollee and a very talented true freshman. But Trey should be ahead of him, right? And you got Michael Clayton coming in a couple years. So for Trey Petty, this is a great opportunity to show you can run the offense, you can improve, the coaching staff can trust you, you can potentially push Ethan Hampton for a backup job. but most importantly, set yourself up to where, yes, I deserve a chance to compete for the starting job next year in what could be a wide open class. And, tell Illinois, you don't need to go to in the portal to go find Luke Altmaier's replacement. You have it here.
Yeah, 100%. That's right. And I think give him a chance to take the backup job from Ethan Hampton. And if he does, great, right? And if he doesn't, you give him those valuable reps, that experience to do exactly what you say.
It's very much the Donovan Leary, John Paddock, right? Kind of situation.
That's absolutely what it is. And if he doesn't take that backup job from Hampton, that's okay. That's just fine, but make it a conversation, make him think. Going to have a ton of reps. You're like a ton of opportunity this spring to go out there and do that. And then again, as you mentioned, get that head start. So maybe your quarterback battle in 26 is an internal battle. Maybe that's where it goes instead of jumping on that quarterback carousel in the portal. And obviously Illinois had success with that, but I think they've got a talented room where you could see a path maybe off that merry-go-round here moving forward for them. And some of that depends on how Trey Petty looks this spring and into the fall and take it from there. But he's really talented. Him and Carson Boyd both kind of ooze that like quarterback swag leadership where they're young now. And I don't think that stops them from being themselves. But I think when they start to get a little older, they start to have those positions on the team that you can see people following them in a hurry. I think. And look, to be honest, for as much as we've talked about that with Luke Altmaier for 2 years, he's got that right now. He absolutely has that right now. So I think this is probably the most like swag, confident, however you want to describe that leadership quarterback room that we've seen from, during Brett Bielema's tenure. And that factors in Tommy DeVito and Art Sikowski have those personalities.
Well, yeah. And it's amazing what you can do when you have some stability and a good offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. You can, be here, build on what he's doing, and show some success. And all of a sudden you get talents like Trey Petty, who had Power 4 offers, Carson Boyd, who had Power 4 offers. Both those guys undersized, right? Trey's probably listed at 6'2", but he's 6'1", probably a little thicker. So he's got a sturdy build. Carson Boyd's definitely undersized. Like he's under 6 foot. Like I'm 5'9", and I'm not really looking up too much at his eyes. So, but ridiculous athlete, great release. I think his arm, like it just feels like it comes out quicker even than Petty. But Petty's dual threat quarterback, a winner. Went to 2 state championships, won one of them in high school at Starkville, where Luke Altmaier won as well. Carson Boyd won a state championship, won a lot of games at Cardinal Ritter. So I love both those. Like those are really good prospects, and it's going to be fun to watch that competition. But Trey Petty can get even a further head start this spring. All right, Joey, what do you got?
Well, there's injuries in the secondary, notably Miles Scott and Xavier Scott. So I'm curious just who's that backup nickel. That's in, I think Tyson Rooks is very much in that conversation. I think that would also open the door at Miles Scott's spot for Mac Resetich. So put those names away. But I want to focus on the corners.
Yeah, the way I would phrase this, Joe, is you're right. The injuries in the secondary, which are fine because they're veterans, right? Like this is a chance for a talented group. Like who's going to stand out with a bunch of reps and first-team reps here?
Yeah, Sabor Kareem would be in that conversation too, I believe, because I don't know how many reps you need to see out of Matt Bailey this spring. But let's start with the corners. We can dive in a little bit more, Jeremy, to the safeties. Terrence Brooks, we should mention, is no longer on the football team.
Shocker.
That has been very expected. That was like the least surprising news, but it was something we had to get on the record and move on. So that he's no longer on the team. He wasn't really in the rotation a year ago. So this is Jaheim Clark time, right? Amar Reynolds time, Vernon Woodward time. We know Torrey Cox. We know Caleb Patterson. I expect those two to be the starters, but can Jaheim Clark overtake one of them? Can Vernon Woodward, can Amar Reynolds step into those bigger roles there? Go ahead.
Yeah, can I ask you a question? Did Jaheim Clark already?
He may have.
Because I couldn't believe I was doing this for my storyline story or my DB spring position preview. He had the most reps among the quarterbacks or cornerbacks over the last several games. And again, this is always a tell, Joey, you got to earn those single-digit numbers. He's now number 6 on the roster. So whenever anybody earns a single-digit number, I always take notice of it. But he earned it last year because he was really pretty good towards the end of the year, but most of all, he got more reps than Caleb Patterson, who had an injury, and that led to some of Clark's snaps, a lot of them at Northwestern. I think 90 snaps at Northwestern, but 6'1", 175 pounds. He's just your typical Aaron Henry defensive back, right? Like long, a little maybe skinny, but he plays bigger than he's listed, feisty, tenacious. But like Caleb Patterson's kind of this 6'2", 210-pound, physically imposing, but not as quick, right? Like just quickness in a short area. While Torrey Cox is really small, but incredibly quick, gets into you, is really sticky in coverage. Jaheim Clark's kind of in the middle of those two.
Yeah, and here's what's going to happen here. We have to say this. They're going to be two starters, right? But I think Corey Parker wants a ton of corners ready to roll. You can go back to what he had at Toledo. He's talked about it on the record. He wants 4, 5, 6 corners ready to go. And I think when you look at the different body types that they have, as you mentioned with Cox and Caleb Patterson and Jaheim Clark, you can mix and match. At Nebraska, when Torrey Cox was getting picked on for being shorter, you can make some different adjustments. And I think that's key. So, yeah, 2 people are going to start, but I think a lot of that's going to be matchup dependent. A lot of that's going to be hot hand dependent, but that's your time for, I think Jaheim Clark has earned that. Maybe he does. Maybe he becomes one of those starters. But Werner Woodward was a name we heard a lot during bowl prep. Your time. It was a good recruiting win. They flipped him from Wisconsin. Yeah. Physical as heck, got all the Florida Aaron Henry vibes in terms of his play style. Amar Reynolds is a guy, another year in the system. Can he move into that? I think those are probably the 2 biggest names beyond Clark, Patterson, and Cox in that cornerback room.
Yeah. I just want to throw out the number that I found. The last 6 games, Jaheim Clark, 52 reps per game. Patterson, 47. Now, Patterson missed a game there. Cox, 36. So, yeah, I mean, Clark was basically a starting cornerback over the last 6 games for Illinois. I loved him as a prep prospect just because he kind of fit that Illinois, kind of what they look for. Kind of reminds me a little Quan, maybe not as freakishly athletic as what Quan was, but has some of that spoon mentality. I thought Woodward had some of that as a prep prospect. Another kid they got coming in that I think has that is Taiwan Cox. So those are guys that just, when I watched the film as a prep prospect, I'm like, that's what Illinois has looked for. Like, that's what they really, really like. The other guy I want to throw in here, because we saw him working with the corners. I thought he was a safety. I think he can play free safety and be really good. But they had Tanner Heckel working with the corners in the 15, 20 minutes we got to see practice the other day. So that's a kid they really want to get into the field, a freak of an athlete. And with Xavier Scott out and Tyler Strain out, Tyson Rooks is a guy we should bring up again, and I'll let you take that. But Tanner Heckel, I wonder if he can be a nickel. So if we get to talk with Corey Parker in the next couple weeks, I want to ask him about Tanner. But that's a guy that maybe they can find a way onto the field, playing both free safety and maybe a little bit of nickel. So it'll be interesting to see.
Hey, let's just talk about Tyson Rooks real quick, because full disclosure, when you go from corner to receiver and back, and I think his receiver move may have been a fall move. I think he would have been with the DBs last spring. We wonder, like, what's going on here? Position switches. We knew they recruited him, as a corner. We didn't know how much receiver is kind of in that ballpark. You wondered what it was going to look like with him. He's back with the corners. He's a nickel that they're really intrigued by because he's 6'5". He's incredibly long.
6'5", defensive back.
He is. I actually, because you've really seen Justin Bowick. We haven't talked to Tyson Rooks a lot. I saw a really tall dude. Like, is this Bowick or Rooks? And Rooks is, I asked that because Rooks is a lot
thicker, 205,
thicker than we had seen him coming in. He's a lot more muscular than we had seen him coming in. So just someone you really got to know this spring ball. And I think maybe if they had a do-over, they wouldn't have experimented at wide receiver. It's just a read I've kind of picked up here over the last couple of weeks. But I know they're really intrigued about what he can do at the defensive back room. An opportunity will meet that. He will have the opportunity this spring.
It's going to be the first string nickel, most likely, right? But yeah, usually 6'4", 6'5" guys can't play defensive back because they're not quick enough. Well, Tyson Rooks, as people saw on Twitter, was a really good tennis player in high school. So you got to have some quickness if you're going to be playing tennis and going side to side like that. So that's part of the reason Aaron Henry really, really liked him.
his physical development isn't like when we saw Tyler Strain, and it's like, oh my God. Because Tyler Strain got huge one offseason. Like you saw him, like, goodness gracious. Tyson Rooks isn't quite that, but he is noticeably thicker than he was. Than we had seen him. I guess we really haven't seen a ton of him when he was experimenting with wide receiver, but he is, you double take because it's not the kid you remember them recruiting. It's been a good couple years of weight gain for him.
For me, I'm really interested in another storyline in tight end because they lost a lot of reps there. We don't think about it because Tanner Arkin played more than any non-quarterback skill player for Illinois. He played more reps than Pat Bryant last year. So that's how important Tanner Arkin was. But they added Gavin Stoffel, tight end transfer out of South Dakota State. They really like him. 6'5", former wide receiver in high school. They think he can be pretty good and potentially take the Henry Boyer role, but he's got some more athleticism to him. So I think those two, Arkin and Stoffel, with a healthy Cole Rusk, you feel pretty good about that. But they play 4 tight ends. Like they play a lot of these guys. They like to play a lot of 12 personnel. If you have an injury or two, who else is going to step up? Like Stoffel's got to prove it this year in spring ball, but the staff seems to really like him. A Jake Furtney, a Tanner Hollinger, some of these tight ends that are, developing in the system, they've kind of had to take these under-recruited guys. Do any of those guys take the next step? But Stoffel certainly will get a ton of reps, which I think is great for him. You think about him going up against the Gabe Backus and some of that with Alec Bryant and Leon Lowry. Like that'll be a big transition for him, but it's a big spring for him. But also without Rusk until at least late in spring ball, Joey, we'll see what they got at this group because they did lose Henry Boyer, who played a lot of snaps. Was it great? Was it hugely productive? No, but Carson Goda played 200, 300 snaps. So they need some guys to fill in there at a very important position for them.
Yeah, I do want to say with tight end is really the biggest crapshoot in trying to understand what you're getting out of a high school kid early on, other than the top 10, 15 tight ends in the country who have everyone coming after them. Usually you're getting a blocker you hope can catch, or someone who can catch you hope can put on weight, block, and still move as well. So it's such a development position, but not, as you might bring that up, because of your Jake Furtneys, your Tanner Hollingers, and seeing what that could be if you need that fourth tight end or who steps into that role. Otherwise, this position's kind of incomplete for me until Cole Rusk comes back. Yep. It's going to be really hard to gauge. I think the reps for Stoffel, the reps for Furtney, the reps for Hollinger are going to be important this spring, but I just need to maybe put a pause until I see Cole Rusk in the fall. Yep. Or even late in the spring, and see how that full arsenal of what they expected can be with them. But I do think if you're looking for names to know, again, the kind of the theme of this pod has been those 2s and 3s. I think you nailed it with Stoffel, Hollinger, and Furtney, and see what happens with them.
I just don't want it to be overlooked that Tanner Arkin, like, if there were an injury to him, like that injury is as impactful as almost any outside of Altmaier on that offense, because he plays so much. He's so valuable to their blocking operation. He can take another level as a pass catcher. I think he is what he is kind of athletically doing that, but just his hands and getting open can be a little bit better. But just what he is to that offense, I think gets kind of overlooked. So that's what concerns me. If Tanner Arkin, who's built like a truck, if he got hurt, like, what do they have there? Like, that's why Davin Stoffel is incredibly important. It's incredibly important for Cole Rusk to get back on the field healthy.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because Tanner Arkin is probably my Luke Altmaier's the clear-cut one. Don't want to lose him to injury offensively. J.C. Davis is hard for me to think I would be thrilled to lose him, but Arkin can't be further down than, I'd say 4, but he slots in probably at 3 for me. Just for that run game to take off like they needed to take off, you need Tanner Arkin out there. And, of course, you've seen him as a safety blanket and really short yardage stuff as a red zone threat. He plays a ton of snaps. I think you're getting a ton out of that guy right now, and I'm with you. Stoffel needs to – this is a big spring for Davin Stoffel and a chance to really establish himself.
All right, Joey, what do you got left?
Oh, boy. What do I have left?
You wrote about something today. You can go
the defensive line.
There you go.
The defensive line. Yeah, did you say that like I don't write about much most days, which is probably true. we know that they reloaded their defensive line in the transfer portal. James Thompson, Kurt Neal, Tomiwa Durjaye. I expect those three to be Thompson the starter, and then the other two at the minimum.
Can we
rotation.
mention
James Thompson's huge? He's massive. Dude. I thought he was a GA.
I looked at you the other day and I go, look at this guy. Like, it's James Thompson. We're sitting there at Pro Day. He's standing next to Brandon Henderson, who's massive. Like, Brandon is massive, and James is just wider, taller, just as strong, right? I was like, they haven't had a defensive lineman like this. Like, Keith Randolph was really good in that kind of that 4-eye, but Thompson's like 3 inches taller than him and just so long. Like, you think of that typical 5 technique, a Richard Seymour type. I'm not saying he's going to be a Hall of Famer, like, but you just think of that body type, right? Like, they haven't had a guy like that. And Durajai's not much smaller. So they're starting to look a little bit different up there. So I just wanted to mention that. Like, they are so high on James Thompson, not only as a player, but what he can bring leadership-wise.
Before we get to the younger guys, which is really the what I wrote today, when we've heard the James Thompson buzz, Brett Bielema has put little nuggets out there here and there. I would like to go with like day 6 of training camp, where it starts to get very loud. Like, that feels like the window where, you know, we're trying to talk about defensive linemen. You're talking about some transfers, and Brett Bielema really stands up and starts yelling about James Thompson. Like, that feels right to me. Do you have another timeline that you think it's going to get noisy?
Next week, probably.
Yeah.
I know they were excited about what Thompson and Kurt Neal looked like in practice last week. So, yeah, like, those guys are – it's so important that they landed those guys. And land 3 of them, right? I'm talking about Durajai, Neal, and Thompson. Like, to get 3 guys who you feel like can start for you, or at least be a very important part of your rotation. Like, Kurt Neal and Jeremiah Warren, I think, are the nose tackles on this team. And then Durajai is going to have to compete with Alex Bray, which I know you want to get into, those third-year guys. Like, but all those guys are going to play a big role, right? Like, those are 3 good quality, proven power 4 defensive linemen at the end.
We do have a not so fast, my friend. The 2 nose tackles. We got to see what happens with T-Rod Edwards.
That's right.
That was a really big storyline out of Pro Day. They've applied for another year of eligibility. Brett Bielema called it a bookkeeping error for his time at Northwestern. He played in 5 games, fewer than 10 snaps. The intent was to redshirt him.
Do you remember when he transferred here? I was like, I even confirmed it with Illinois. He's got, 4 years of eligibility, right? Because he had COVID
4 to play
year,
4, right?
And they played 3 games, and they're like, yep, he's got 4. And I remember it being in his profile, too. And then it changed. Like, one day, all of a sudden, he was like a redshirt sophomore. And it was like, oh, what changed there? Apparently, he played in 5 games and not 3.
In retrospect, we probably should have intended up a little bit more, but some of those changes happened in the middle of training camp, and you don't really notice it. But that's a huge domino sitting out there, and he seems willing to come back. He stayed and trained on campus. It does sound stressful for him. It truly sounds very stressful. I thought he had a fine pro day. I think he's going to get into a camp if his college career is, in fact, done and see what happens. But if you could get him back, and all of a sudden you've got Kurt Neal, T-Rod Edwards, Jeremiah Warren, maybe Angelo McCollum, General Hunt, like, suddenly you've got nose tackles who can get out there and do some things. And I don't know.
I'd start to think about putting Jeremiah Warren at the 4-eye, 3 technique, something like that, like, just to get him on the field. But yeah, I wrote it in my 7 thoughts, Joey. Like, the thought of him coming back, T-Ra, this would be by far the deepest defensive line that Brett Bielema has had. I already think it is because of what the 3rd-year guys, Jeremiah Warren, Alex Bray, Pat Farrell, those guys were backups last year when maybe Jeremiah, I don't think Pat Farrell was ready for that. Just needs to add a little bit more strength. Like, even Alex Bray, was he ready to completely be that? I'm very high on his future. But now, like, as 3rd-year players in the system, those guys could be quality rotation players or even starters. But then you got James Thompson and Durajai and Kurt Neal and potentially T-Rod Edwards, who was deservedly all Big Ten honorable mention. Like, he was really good last year. So you think about stopping the run, right? Like, this team has to get better, run defense, and then you're obviously your outside linebackers get after quarterbacks. Your linebackers are pretty good blitzers, but they got to get more stout. And it feels like with the rotation they have, if T.R. Edwards comes back, I'm already buying this defense for next year. But you get back that piece at nose tackle, be pretty high.
I actually really like T.R. Edwards' pass rush value from that position, which isn't really thought of as a heavy pass rush position. That's very much take up space, stop the run, open up your Keith Randolphs, your Johnny Newtons. But I thought he had pretty good value of getting after the quarterback last season. So the long-winded way of finally circling back to Alex Bray, Pat Farrell, Angelo McCollum, Jeremiah Warren is out for this spring. Terrence Jamison told me this is basically like a coaching role for Jeremiah Warren. Learn, and to your point, I do want to bring up this quote because I think your point is pretty spot on. If T.R. Edwards comes back, let me find it here.
But I thought Jeremiah Warren looked pretty good last year in his rotation role.
Absolutely.
He looks the part, man.
Your point about moving him to maybe another position, if you get a T.R. Edwards back, Terrence Jamison told me, we just spoke after this would have been Tuesday's meeting, and an emphasis for him is he wants to be an expert in our defense. I think this is a great opportunity for him to grow holistically in terms of how our defense works. Not just his positions, but all the positions up front and maybe some others on top of that. That, to me, like, obviously you want your defensive linemen to be very, very aware spatially out there and what other positions are doing. But that, to me, is like, hey, why don't you maybe watch some of these other spots? If we get T-Rod back, we've got a window for you, buddy, and it's maybe right next to T-Rod, and we'll see what goes on there.
Because McCollum's not that big. Like, he's not that long, right? General Hunt's not that long. Kurt Neal's not that long. They're like all around like 6 foot. Like, you have to play in between the guards. Jeremiah Warren's 6'3", 305. Like, and he's quick enough, athletic enough to where, especially on rundowns, I think he could play in that 3 or that 4-eye technique for Illinois. So, yeah, that next step for them, though, I think it's natural. Like, second-year players are going to be a little overpowered at times, just be a little out of it. But that's why depth was such a concern last year. I'm excited about the depth on the defensive line. You had T.R. Edwards to it. Unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's now defensive line, offensive line, quarterbacks. Those are the ones that take some time. Defensive line, offensive line, physically, quarterbacks, you're putting a lot of trust in them. It takes some time to get on the field for most of those guys because you're asking a lot of them. But now it's the time for those recruiting wins of 3 years ago, of 2 years ago, especially Angelo McCollum, Demetrius John from 2 years ago. Now it's their chance to find their window onto the field and see, especially those third-year guys. Alex Bray, Pat Farrell, Jeremiah Warren. Like, this is starter rotation time. That's what development programs do. Alex Bray did not redshirt. Farrell did.
Yeah, Farrell and Warren did.
And Warren did, but it's time. It's time for those guys to go out there, even with a reshaped defensive line room with proven Power 5 players, starters in the case of Neal and James Thompson. You need rotations there. You need those third-year guys to be ready to make impacts and use last year. Similar to, you think about how many times you've heard Bart Miller say 2023 can't be for nothing. Some of the struggles on the offensive line can't be for nothing. Some of those snaps getting overpowered at times last year on those backup defensive linemen. Use that experience now and catapult that into a rotation role.
Yeah, I mean, Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph played like 100, 200 snaps in their first or second years, right? All of that kind of builds up at that position. All right, a couple quick ones before we get out of here. The outside linebacker coaches, right? I think that's a huge storyline because it's a really talented position, really deep position. Obviously, Gabe Akis, an All-American candidate, Leon Lowry, Alec Bryant, Joe Barna, JoJo Hayden, Daniel Brown. Like, there's a lot of flavors there. There's a lot of talent and experience there. But you got some new coaches, right? So I'm really interested to see how this works with a kind of a committee approach with Trent Harris leading the room, Alex Panos coming back as co-outside linebackers coach and getting that role. And then you had a guy like Joe Kim, their skills development coordinator, who I would note when we were watching practice, at least for most of the time that we got to watch 30 minutes of practice, was spending a lot of time with the edge rushers, which makes sense because that's what he was in the NFL. He was a pass rush consultant for most of that time. That's a lot of voices, so I'm interested to see how that works and how Brett Bielema kind of makes that all work with them because that's a really really talented group, and you got to get the most out of them. So Brett Bielema kind of going this committee approach with all these different guys, including some improving guys and a new guy in Joe Kim. Just interested to see how it works, Joey.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how all that works. And Brett Bielema, that was his position coach or position room in the NFL. So there's a lot of different ideas, probably a lot of different. I don't know how much he's day to day with the outside linebackers. I do think he truly steps back and let his coaches coach, but I'm sure he's not short of opinions, I would have to guess, with some of those position coaches. We should also note last spring, last training camp, we continued. I do think it's still a possibility, but I think the conversation's quieted down, talking about Gabe Backus and where he can play in terms of on the defensive line or outside linebacker. And there was versatility. I expect there still be some versatility. But I think right now we're all pretty cool with him being an outside linebacker, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely, because you got enough defensive linemen now. Like, that was a big part of it. Is like, I still think he could be a great 3-tech in the NFL if he bulked up, or I think that would be his spot. I don't think he's a 5, but yeah, he's an outside linebacker. He showed last year that he can get after the quarterback and be a more consistent pass rusher. But I also thought Aaron Henry did a really good job, Terrence Jameson as well, of getting Gabe in some one-on-one battles with their stunts, with getting him inside on third downs. I still think you're going to see that, right? Like him line up as a 3-tech on third downs where it's an obvious passing situation in their turbo package. So yeah, I think he's definitely an outside linebacker, in part because they don't need anybody else on the defensive line, I don't think, because they got some good players there.
Yeah, other names to watch there: Leon Lowry, Alec Bryant. Those are the two, as you mentioned, Daniel Brown, JoJo Hayden. I do want to mention inside linebackers really quickly.
Looks different.
We did see looks different, but I just want to say there's some encouraging news. We saw Dylan Rosiak running around out there. We didn't know what that was going to be. It looked like he had an ankle injury, which ultimately cost him his season, and at the same time kind of changed the view of this inside linebacker room. So we'll see if Malachi Hood can build on the reps. James Kreutz can build on those reps this spring.
Those guys look stronger too.
That's right. Obviously, Ishkante, Grant Bierman is incredibly long, needs to see some strength. Let's pump the brakes on 4-star immediately out there impacting. But that is a room that a year ago we're like, okay, what's going to happen here? Dylan Rosiak gets hurt, and it's really like, whoa, this is bad news right now. And that's pieced together. Credit to Archie McDaniel for finding and Aaron Henry for finding the best ways to get those guys to produce where they can, whether that was those turbo packages on third down that we saw Malachi Hood unlock in, James Kreutz slowing down a little bit at linebacker, and you still using that physicality. I think the way that position room has developed shouldn't be overstated. And hey, real quick, while we're on that, and I know you want to add something, what a pro day for Ryan Mead.
Awesome.
He was a guy who did, I mean, let's be honest, he struggled early. I think at the end of the day, he would probably tell you that he wanted to play better early. But, man, I thought he played good ball late in the season. He tested well. He should find his way into a camp. And I think he's going to be a hard guy eventually to get rid of in the NFL because he does everything right. And special teamers, if that's his path. Yeah. And as Brett Bielema kind of likened Jake Hansen with him, there's a lot of value to multi-position guys who are good to go out there and be really good on special teams. Might be getting ahead of ourselves, but he's going to get into a camp.
No, I'm glad you brought him up because, I mean, let's be honest. Like, we're sitting there, in the press box against Kansas, going against Devin Neal, and it just didn't look like he could do it. He was in the right spot, but just couldn't make the play. It's like, is he a good enough athlete, right? Then he goes out his pro day and runs a 4.51 40, goes 37.5 inches in the vertical jump. I think he had a 9.9 broad jump. Just really shined and made the most of his opportunity. But to your point, like late in the season, he was really good and he was confident. And I think it's hard for guys to walk on from Brooklyn and only played special teams so a little bit his first couple of years and only played special teams the last couple of years. And then all of a sudden he's a starting linebacker. Weak side linebacker to start the year, plays 300 snaps, and there was times he really struggled. But late in the season, he just kept believing in himself, and the staff kept believing in him based on what they saw in practice, and he really produced well during their last 4 games, that 4-game winning streak. So we talk about Kreutz and Hood, but Mead was a part of that as well. And obviously he's got his big moment against South Carolina with that pass breakup in the end zone, but I just thought he was a consistent stopper. Like when there was a play to be made in the last 4 or 5 games, I thought he made those plays when he wasn't early in the season. So wonderful story. And yes, he's going to get into a camp, Joey, which is awesome because you give that guy a chance, he'll find a way on special teams, I think.
Yeah, I also want to say, like, I don't know if we're talking enough. I think Archie McDaniel is really, really, really good at his job.
One thing I wanted to point out.
We talk about Terrence Jamison. Archie McDaniel is really stinking good at what he does.
One thing I want to point out about what they did, and Aaron's mentioned it, and you can see it when they play, is they didn't just go, okay, James Kreutz, you're playing 80 snaps of what Dylan Rosiak did. Because Dylan Rosiak's a versatile player, can handle it all. James Kreutz is really probably a first and second down linebacker, right? So that's what they did. They kept him to that, didn't ask him to cover in space a lot. They'd bring in Malachi Hood to be that guy on third downs where you got to cover running backs in space. They put Ryan Mead when they needed a second linebacker in there with Kreutz. They bring in Kenana Odeluga as a pass rusher, a blitzer, right? So like that mixing and matching and using sub packages to put these guys in best positions to succeed, I thought was great. You saw it with JoJo Hayden too, right? Like just putting those guys in successful packages. Daniel Brown against South Carolina. Like all of a sudden we're seeing like coverages and sub packages that we hadn't seen against South Carolina, and Daniel Brown played a lot of snaps in that game, and I thought he looked pretty good. So kudos to that staff, and I agree. Archie's a big part of that.
Yeah, and I wonder how much they'll have to do that as your Grant Biermans, as your Cam Thomases develop in your system, and they can be maybe more of an all-down type of back. But I thought they did a great job of pivoting and piecing it together and not being so stubborn. And James Kreutz, you have to be Dylan Rosiak at all times now. Credit to them for doing that. That room. Sometimes I still can't believe we're kind of talking about it in the way that we are, because was it the Purdue game that Rosiak got hurt? Or was it before that? It was bleak, right? Outlook was like, this is not good.
That was Michigan State.
Okay.
First half.
You didn't think we'd be having this conversation like we are right now. So credit to that room and those coaches for finding a way to piece it together and really unlocking. I think one of the bigger storylines the final few games last year was unlocking Malachi Hood, because he was a guy you've been waiting to see what this was. Because he has all that you want. He looks awesome physically. Mm-hmm. He's fast. He can move. He's strong. You've been kind of waiting, and injury slowed him down a little bit. But I thought just seeing what you have in him and seeing if you can carry that over into this year was massive, for him in particular at that spot.
Yeah, there's I believe 12 or 13 freshmen who have come in. I do think Braden Trimble is the one for fans to keep their eye on. This is now a program where you don't need true freshmen to make a big impact. But we always know 2, 3, 4, right, will not redshirt, will find a way onto the field. And a lot of those guys, in my opinion, are coming into the summer, whether that's Tywan Cox, Desmond Stroughton, the running backs, John Forster and Cedric White, who are coming in. I do want to mention that Cameron Brooks looks the part. 6'3", 305-pound defensive lineman out of Chicago. I think he really looks the part. We've mentioned McDonough, big spring for him because he'll get a bunch of snaps at center. Eric Gale is here. You mentioned Grant Bierman. He's 6'4", 6'5", like a legit 6'4", 6'5", thinking he's at about 15, 20 pounds. But maybe you can find a role on special teams early this season. R.J. Jones, a defensive back, is here on campus. Andre Lovett, Zanai Scott, Xavier's little brother. Those DBs usually can find a way onto the field, especially on special teams. So those would be the ones to watch. But I wanted to mention those. Not going to be a lot of opportunity, I think, for freshmen outside of special teams unless Braden Trimble cracks the rotation.
Yeah, I'm with you. I can't wait to talk to Cam Brooks. I'm glad you mentioned him because I find myself kind of overlooking him a little bit. He was not this big when Illinois first got in recruiting him physically.
240, right? I think, when they offered him.
Yeah. And I remember talking to his coach after he committed, and I messaged you and Alan, and I was like, hey, just kind of a heads up. He says he's up like 280, 290 right now. And he played like that, and now he had a little bit more coming in. So that has been quite the physical change for Cam Brooks over the last 16, 18 months.
Great eval by J-Mo because he was an edge rusher as a junior, right? And then all of a sudden he adds all this strength, but the athleticism. Allen is very high on what he can become, and obviously the offer list got pretty big towards the end of this. So to hold on to him was big because Michigan was really interested in him late in this process. Keelan Crimmins. Sounds pretty good.
Great hair, great accent. Good for you, buddy.
Yeah, he's going to do well. Keelan is they like what they see out of him. The hang time is much improved, about a half second better than what Hugh Robertson was. So they feel good about him. We got to mention.
And it matches the power. Hang time matches power with them, right? I mean, yeah.
And then Colin Blocky, otherwise known as Colin Block Eye, is the backup punter. Redshirt freshman.
We
wondered who it would be. That's who it is. A guy named Block Eye. I think it's Blocky.
It's Blocky, which is kind of maybe not what you hope from a punter.
When it's Block Eye at Illinois, that's pretty good.
That's right. Kicker, don't need to say much about kicker. I would expect that to run status quo. David Alano, field goal. Ethan Machowski, kickoff. Maybe some super long kicks. David Alano, just kind of let him go, right? Let him do his thing. He'll be fine. And it sounds like he does. I mean, I don't know how good of an offseason kickers do or don't have, but he was good last year. And I expect the same.
Obviously, they have to replace a kick returner. Kadari Wilcher, gone at Florida A&M now. So they got to replace that role. It's not a role that gets a lot of reps, to be honest with you, anymore, because you're mostly just doing the T-bar in the back there, which is now a fair catch, by the way. Bielema got that rule changed. Just phenomenal. But
do you think Bielema's going to have the entire kick return unit doing that?
I hope so.
Whole sideline, whole stadium.
It's a vibe.
He's absolutely going to elect to receive the first home game so the whole place can do the T-bar. There's no doubt.
It's a vibe. It's a statement about what Illinois football is now. I just think it's awesome. It's such an awesome thing. All right. Who's the kick returner? Who do you think?
I think Trimble's a name to watch in there. I do think
Hank Beatty was back there along with Wilcher.
Yeah, Hank Beatty could still be in that conversation. I do think it became clear. Remember, they had Pat Bryant, they had Josh McCray back there. I think you're no doubt starters. He's gotten away from wanting them.
So Aiden Lawfrey,
returners. Aiden Lawfrey is probably no. I don't know. I was thinking you can still find some more wiggle room with him, given you have such a big running back committee.
I think it's a way to get Khalil Valentine on the field as long as he catches the ball. Hudson Clement, I think you'd want to stay away from.
Ken Murphy Clement?
Yeah. Mac Rusetich?
Mac Rusetich could be in that.
I know he'll be in the
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, but to your point, I mean, it's not like it used to be. I think a lot of those are glorified fair catches and see what happens. But that's probably one of the more significant training camp battles among starters.
Yeah. For your 12 kick returns a year. I think they had 13 last year, 13 or 14 kick returns last year. So it's not even a big role. The punt returner role is huge, which is why you feel good about Hank Beatty being your guy there. The last one is Joey, just recruiting. There's a huge month ahead for recruiting. They get all these unofficial visits, but then April, the official visits will start, and they have some huge weekends. You got Nasir Rankin and Micah Smith, a 4-star offensive lineman, visiting the first weekend of April, along with some other guys. And then that second weekend, April 11th, Max Sutter, James Johnson, I don't know if Johnson is anymore, but Max Sutter, J.C. Anderson, Kai Pritchard, 4-star offensive lineman out of New Jersey, Tony Williams, a linebacker out of Florida, Messiah Tilson, top 10 prospect out of Rockford, Emilian Thomas, a defensive back, Marlon Bright, offensive lineman, King Liggins, 3-star defensive lineman, Jamarian Phillips, a linebacker out of Texas. That first weekend of April, Jacob Eberhardt, we shouldn't overlook, Illini Legacy out of St. Louis. Huge couple weekends in recruiting there for Illinois football. And you hope you add, because you got a good thing going, top 10 class right now in the class of 2026, and you hope you can close on a few of these and set yourself up well. But getting the early official visits is interesting, because some of these guys are still going to take visits into June.
Yeah, well, some of them will. I think your hope is some of them won't. You get them on campus and get an early pop. It kind of depends. I think every kid is different for whether you want them first or whether you want them last. I know there's a way to, if you're first, you're showing, like if you're the first at your position group, it's clear you're a priority at that school, because if you're the third at your position group, a school could cancel that visit. And I think that's something you have to consider in the recruiting process. But, in the case of some of these guys who have visits set up in the spring and then in the summer, that can be a long waiting process. But yeah, April's turning into a big recruiting month, and we'll see if Illinois can capitalize. It's been a really good class so far, and I don't think you have to wait till June anymore. I think you'll probably see a couple kids in the month of April into early May decide to jump on board. I know we got to get Jeremy some energy drinks. We got to get you hooked on those if I ever catch back up with you guys in the postseason to get you prepared for what's going to be in April.
It's going to be crazy. I don't know when the down month is. May, I'm getting away for a week and not having my phone on, so hopefully May slows it down a little bit. I mean, 0-4 is one I'd be really interested when he takes an official visit. Barrington offensive lineman. I do think they're sitting well there, but Indiana and Northwestern in the mix. But Rankin and Eberhardt, those would be two I'd really be looking at, because Eberhardt's dad played at Illinois in the early 2000s. Rankin, I think they've been sitting well with, but he's got Oregon and USC and all these schools really trying to get him on campus. But those would be the two I'd really look at. And then that next weekend, J.C. Anderson, I think they've made up ground. And Auburn, North Carolina are still in the mix. Notre Dame's still in the mix. I think they've set themselves up well, but I think that might take a while, right? Like that could take into June because he's got a lot of other visits set up. So Rankin and Eberhardt would be the ones I'm most interested in over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and fours. I expect Anderson to take his visits into the summer. That's the plan going into it. So let's see if they can get a couple more additions here in April. And so again, I think that's why they had started spring practices last week to get some kids on campus for their spring break, and maybe there'll be a couple more spring breaks that align with coming out of Illinois. But it's a big window here for them to keep pushing. And what a freaking start to this recruiting class in terms of talent and numbers to get as many recruits as they had. It's moving along pretty well right now.
Still the number 6 class. Right? That'll come down at some point as these powerhouses start to fill up, I would imagine, but still the number 6 class, and I think they're trending to where top 30 class, I have little doubt. Top 25 class, I think good chance. And if they get the right amount of 4 stars, you have a chance to get even higher than that. So this will be the best recruiting class they've had. Obviously, you got to hold on to your guys, and that'll be really important, but feel good about where they're at. Excited about Austin, Joey? Heading out on Friday?
I am. I have to pack shorts, which is exciting. Try to get my steps in, see if I can get some good barbecue, and
never been to Austin.
Find my way to a beer or two.
Never been to Austin, Texas. It's on my list.
I'm excited. Hey, on a real note, we talked about it the other night. It's a huge opportunity for the Illinois women to get that first tournament win in 25 years. They play at 6:15 on Saturday against Creighton, and a chance to get number 1 seed Texas, barring some sort of unlikely and wholly unexpected upset of 16-1 with Texas and Austin. So I'll be there. You guys will be in Milwaukee. I hope you go to the Milwaukee Brat House in the old German beer hall and dance on tables and have big glasses of beer.
I will have big glasses of beer at the old German house, but yes, I would. I don't know if I'll be dancing on tables.
Got to live a little.
I'm trying to think about. Yes, I have danced on the table. I was in a fraternity house, so yes, that has happened. Don't know if 38-year-old Jeremy will be doing that this week.
Take you a minute to climb up on the table, probably, huh?
Well, I got to stretch a little bit first. Don't want to pull a hamstring.
Oh, I love Milwaukee though.
It's great.
Phenomenal. I think it's right next to I think it's the Milwaukee Brat House, or right next to it. They got a huge soft pretzel. That's my.
Oh, that's your jam.
That's my jam. And there's like a cinnamon dipping sauce that goes with it. It's really. I mean, when I say it is massive. Oh. I mean, it's like 1.5 pounds of soft pretzel, and I couldn't be happier. It's I need Illinois men to get to Indy next week, assuming the women, if they have to beat Texas for me to stay with them going forward with those breadsticks at Kilroy's, man. I had 2, and I have to go back. I really thought about going over there for lunch one day, like a 2-hour lunch to Kilroy's in Indy, just to get this terrible greasy breadstick that I could find way better food in town.
Had a good breakfast at the diner. I forgot what it was called. Next to our Airbnb. But I got an Airbnb close to the Lakefront Brewery, so that made it a walkable distance. That was planned by me, so because that's
just gonna have it. If the women lose on Saturday somehow,
come on
I have to do a red eye and pick my car up at the hotel or at the airport on the way back.
O'Hare's on the way back for me, buddy. I can take you there.
I think Illinois women have a good chance of staying around. I do. Creighton's tough, but I think it's a good chance for them to get to that second game in the NCAA tournament. And you got to plan, you got to book smart, but you got to pack and plan to stay there for a little bit. And that's my That's my goal.
Well, it's awesome, Joey, that you're going to cover them. And we appreciate all the support of you guys, whether you're just watching this on YouTube or listening on the podcast. That support certainly helps. But if you're a VIP member, that really helps us go travel the country and follow these teams. And we've been really happy. Joey's been awesome covering the Illini women's team. So to continue that, we need support. We need your support. So if you're not a VIP member, now's a good time to do that. You can get 30% off a full year, or you get $1 for the next month. See if you like it, and stick with us if you do. So we appreciate all that. It allows us to cover these teams the way we do. So we appreciate the ways you guys support us, whether it's the podcast, YouTube, or on the VIP side of things. But for Joey Wagner, I am Jeremy Werner. Everybody have a great day. Take care of each other. We will talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inquirer Podcast.